It's good to be with you this morning. Thank you for braving the non-icy roads to be here. I am going to be very honest, I'm a little nervous about this Sunday, stretching out of my comfort zone a little bit, so here we go. I grew up Catholic, and while I hold on fast to many elements of this faith doctrine, there's some aspects of this religion that I'm working to decolonize or deconstruct for myself. Growing up, I did not have the language of purity culture, but when I hear that phrase today and when I study the tenets of that movement, I see vestiges of it in the Catholic Church that I was raised under. Saving yourself for marriage was pretty sacrosanct for me growing up, and my virginity was seen as the ultimate gift I could give my spouse on our wedding day. Catholic girls, we kind of grow up aspiring to be little Virgin Marys. I knew it was not one of the 10 Commandments etched in Moses' tablets, but thou shalt not have sex until marriage might as well have been on that third tablet. It feels like it was Commandment 11. Anybody else? No? I mean, very important. In high school, I was not really popular. I didn't have a lot of boyfriends. I think maybe one. So I didn't really have to fight sexual temptation, which of course made me falsely believe that the whole wait until marriage thing was going to be a cakewalk. I was so naive. Of course, even not dealing with that temptation, I did have to combat other emotions, ripples of my sexuality that I was intensely confused by. I didn't understand the science of my body, and we didn't talk about it. Masturbation wasn't talked about at all, and stop. I am a grown woman, you guys, and I would rather talk about the death of my mother than to talk about this with you. That's how ingrained this is for me. This purity culture, this is so deeply rooted in my identity, and it's a part of my identity that needs a lot of unearthing. Now, I realize that this talk this morning may not apply to everyone in the room, but I'm willing to bet for certain women of certain ages, of certain religious or spiritual backgrounds, this might be true for you too, and for the rest of you, for whatever reasons this may not fit into your own identity story, I am guessing that there is someone you know and love for whom this is true. This is very vulnerable space for me, and so my prayer, really it's my supplication, is that I'm met with a little bit of grace this morning. My ideas on this are still kind of in the formation stage, and while I didn't arrive at any conclusions today lightly, I'm still muddling my way through this journey, which is to say, these ideas are not etched in stone for me, not all of them. I want to underscore this because I think in today's culture of quickly evolving news, misinformation, disinformation, I feel we're nailed to our opinions as if they are fixed, and we are not allowed to change our minds. And what I want to underscore today is that I'm sharing ideas that are still in incubation. In prep for this, I read an article by Angie Hong in The Atlantic about the flaws of purity culture. And while I was reading, I realized the sort of Catholic don't talk about it approach saved me from a lot of toxicity of the purity culture movement. I wasn't told to give side hugs like the author was. I didn't read books about sexual chastity. Men's thoughts were not necessarily my burden to carry, nor was I told to dress in a way that would keep men's thoughts clean. In my house, we just didn't talk about it. Here's how the sex talk went down. In my house, it's very quick. Don't have sex. If you have sex, don't get pregnant. If you get pregnant, don't abort the baby. Side note, I'll raise it as my own. That was it. There was no questions. Later, there was something about God selecting seeds in my ovaries that would divinely become children, but my mother left the biology out of it altogether. Fallopian tubes, periods, the actual mechanics of baby making were left out. I didn't discover that until 6th grade health class. That's it. That was my sexual education as a young girl, and abstinence was the only way, really. In a lot of ways, my trajectory was rather normal. I morphed into a hormonal teenager who crushed on boys. My mother encouraged the use of makeup, and she wanted me to perm my hair and then maybe dye it, so that was a little confusing. I was supposed to be pretty enough to attract men, but demure enough to keep chaste. And because I grew up in a fairly strict household that held mostly to Costa Rican Catholic traditions, I really didn't have any opportunities to test boundaries. I had no sleepovers. My curfew was a good 2 hours earlier than anyone else, and I lived out in the boonies, so I had to leave the party before the party actually really got started. No booze. It was very safe. I was safe, both from the dangers of the outside world, but also from my own awakening. College came with it a few hundred miles of distance. That's not surprising, right, that I would put some distance there between my parents in Florida and school right here in North Carolina. And you guys, the embedded morality of what a good girl does and doesn't do was so strong that I barely even dabbled in drinking. No drugs, no sex. I was the model child of an immigrant mother. What I'm coming to understand only now in life is that this sexual repression has some deep fissures, wounds to my sense of self, of what value I bring as a woman to the world. This only gets more complicated when I consider the times I've been called exotic, or how many people have commented on how jealous they are of my permanent tan. What I come to understand now is that this othering sets up impossible binary. By my own Latinx community and upbringing, I was raised and viewed to be submissive, subservient. By the white gaze, mostly male, I was either seen as an exotic temptress or beneath anyone's notice. Binaries serve no justice in our world today. This narrative that I must be temptingly beautiful but pure and chaste resulted in layers of shame that I still don't think I fully recognize. I can tell you, though, how it manifests. I was incredibly awkward and really shy at intimacy. I am still incredibly awkward and shy at intimacy. I've been married to my partner, Bo, for 14 years this spring. We've dated for 8 before that. I don't know how many decades, that's a lot of years, right? And I still to this day, sometimes worry that I'm going to be physically rejected by him, despite how wonderful and affirming he is. Y'all, my palms, the natural deodorant that I put on this morning is not cutting it. I want to run to the thing and be like, stop the live view right now. Like, Facebook, bye, just get the notes from someone else. I'm dying that there might be a record of this. This is hard. Okay, so it's hard to admit out loud. But why? Why am I feeling this way? I've heard men talk about their sex lives with no shame. Some in ways that are really harmful, some in healthy ways. But we've watched the unhealthy ways, they get away with it. The rhetoric that boys will be boys is so damaging, so caustic. Women who, quote unquote, lose their virtue are wayward, slutty, loose. Men are dubbed players, language that leans on athleticism. They conquer, which suggests women are still objects to be broken. These are impossible standards, impossible binaries. Purity culture would have women believe their value comes from their actions, from their choices to save themselves for marriage. But our worth, he, she, they, or otherwise, is inherently already there. We are loved, period. Not because we close our legs, but because God made those legs. The story of Ruth, which is one I love and have often spoken about from this stage, is often held up as a model of a chaste, good woman being rewarded with a good man. Ruth got her Boaz for her virtue. But I think a closer reading of the text shows the focus is on the loyalty between women, the solidarity that marked Ruth and Naomi's survival. Boaz, of course, factors into the narrative, but the romanticized story that makes Boaz Ruth's benefactor, I think, misses the point entirely. It's not a knight in shining armor story. That's not who saves Ruth. It's her own determination, her steadfast loyalty and friendship with her mother-in-law that sees to a happy ending. Rest assured, if Boaz never even factored into this tale, I don't doubt for a second Ruth and Naomi's plucky resourcefulness would save them. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I believe wholeheartedly we are destined and designed for relationship. But what if we miss the mark on thinking that the ultimate relationship is a love match? I want to roll back to the commandments. They should be coming up on the screen. See, I was right. There's not an 11th one. You don't, right? There's not one about sex. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the nature of these 10. The first 5, if we think about God as being our ultimate mother and father, are about relationship with God. And then the next 5 give us outlines or give us rules for how to be in relationship with one another. And sure, there is one about adultery, but there's also how to treat your neighbor. If these are the most sacred tenets of the Torah, or the Jewish Bible, or the Old Testament, as Christians call it, where did we go astray to place top value on finding and honoring a romantic partner? I know that purity culture pulls from lines of scripture to justify this code of context, but I guess what I'm more interested in is why we fall in the pursuit of finding and keeping the one as the highest order. My youth had a singular path in this regard. Virginity was my value, marriage was the aspiration, and ultimately, pregnancy was the destination. That graphic in Spanish, probably the easiest way to translate that would be first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby in the baby carriage, right? We remember that nursery rhyme? It was like a code of conduct. I didn't know. A key problem of the purity culture movement is that it emphasizes family as the end game. At its core, singledom was either a temporary status or a problem to be solved. The Christian game of life was won in a successful marriage that bore the fruit of children. That's an incredibly exclusionary path, though, isn't it? Think about everybody you know that is excluded from that singular pathway. My parents, I love them. They told me I could be anything. And they supported me in my educational and professional pursuits. But the unspoken path was always this one. I never imagined a life that didn't include marriage. It was sort of a given. I also don't think I ever imagined single life could be fulfilling because other than priests, I knew no single adults. Every aunt, uncle, youth group pastor, coach, up until college, they were all married in heteronormative unions. Of course I was conditioned for a singular route. Husband, 2 kids, a pet, a house, white picket fence. If we're keeping score, the only thing I'm missing is the white picket fence. That's it. Now, as a woman in her middle years, I do understand the value that marriage brings to my life, and it is wonderful. But I also know that my friendships are a foundational bedrock to my success as a human being. My relationships at work matter greatly too. And my relationship with community, with you, matters deeply. I can't just tend to my marriage. If I did only tend to my marriage, I'd be half the person I am today. The covenant expressed in those 10 commandments extends my value beyond just a woman made for one man. It places my value in connection to other people, in community. Growing up, my virginity was protected for 2 reasons: to keep me close to God and in his favor, and to find and be worthy of a husband. But the commandments don't suggest that it's my virginity that nears me to God. And I need to hit the pause button here for a second. Ultimately, I'm glad I held on to my V card for as long as I did. It was a really long time, don't ask. Frankly, I don't think that I possessed the confidence or maturity to handle myself had I not. My sexuality, just like every other part of my identity, is interwoven with my faith, my spirituality, and my relationship with God, in the same way that my motherhood is, or my profession, or my relationship with nature, or my brownness. It's impossible for me to pull at one string of my identity and not tug on the others. My abstinence did draw me closer to God, but not in the ways purity culture would suggest. Rather, it did so because I was a late bloomer. I can admit that. And that slow unraveling was a mystery to me, just as God is a beautiful mystery to me. I came to know myself slowly, and for that, I am mostly glad. I think sexual intimacy too soon gives a false sense of security, and I would not have done well there. But also that late bloom, that culture of seeing my value through the lens of others did do some damage. Of course it did. And it did, as I mentioned, affect my relationships, mostly the one with myself. So here I am, just beginning the work of peeling back the veneer of understanding my sexual self, my personal history in this particular regard. I will never forget when my mother discovered I wasn't a virgin. I was out of college, I was adulting. I define adulting by paying taxes and bills. So I was adulting. I was 20-something years old, we'll just go there. Living on my own, I was dating Bo, my husband, right? So she found, it was stapled to my agenda that was in my bag, in my room when I was visiting my parents, but she found it on the floor. Found a prescription for birth control in my planner. Okay, now remember, the code that we lived by was we just didn't talk about it. And my mother and I had a difficult and strained relationship in seasons. There was always deep and abiding love, but there was always tension too. So she asked me point blank if I was having sex, which for her was pretty amazing. We didn't have that type of relationship. So I decided to be truthful. I didn't want to cover one sin with another, the one that's actually, in the 10 Commandments. So I was like, I'm going to be honest. And she had done this whole, let's talk woman to woman thing. And she was really calm. And I sort of thought, naively, I was like, this is going to go well. Friends. It did not go well. I don't remember the particulars of the conversation. Probably there's some traumatic forgetting there. Bo was on the visit. And if he had not been on the visit, it would have gone really worse because she had to save face. So we had the conversation. Everything was fine. No feathers ruffled. Good visit. As soon as I got home, though, I think I crossed the North Carolina border. My phone's ringing. And she let me know how disappointed she was in me. She also used me as a model to my brother, who was in high school at the time, of what an unchaste woman looked like and what the consequences I would now have to bear, especially if Bo and I didn't work out, because it would mean that I would have to be forthcoming with the next person. And she felt that put me in great danger of not finding a match. And I joke, but my mother truly believed this, and that was her fear, right? So I don't want to diminish, as misguided as that was, that she was really trying to love and care for me. Obviously, this is a painful memory for me. It is wrapped up in shame. Shame has long roots in my relationship with my body, with my sense of self, and my perception of my value. Shame tells me I have sinned against God with my body. Shame tells me I'm not attractive enough without the luster of purity. Shame tells me I'm too brown, too fat, too loose, or not loose enough. The roots are long and deep because they feed on silence. Brené Brown says this of shame: shame loves secrecy. The most dangerous thing to do after a shaming experience is to hide or bury our story. When we bury our story, the shame metastasizes, it spreads. In the Catholic world I knew, we didn't talk about it. But I think that's also the secular world I know too. Women, we don't generally talk about sex, not openly. We don't talk about reproductive health, about infertility or pregnancy loss, about postpartum depression, divorce, sexual abuse, domestic violence. Singledom as a perfectly happy and healthy choice. Our relationships with our physical bodies, we don't talk about it. Secrecy and silence fuel the shame women feel. Purity culture and the emphasis of premarital sex as an unforgivable transgression against God fuel the shame we feel too. And I think it's the shame that keeps us farthest from God. It's the shame that builds a wedge. But Romans 3:23 tells us no human is pure and without sin. I like the vernacular of the Message translation for this, so I'll read it. Basically, God has set things right. But in our time, something new has been added. What Moses and the prophets witnessed to all those years ago has happened. The God setting things right that we read about has become Jesus setting things right for us. And not only for us, but everyone who believes in him. For there is no difference between us and them in this. Since we've compiled this long and sorry record as sinners, both us and them, and proved that we are utterly incapable of living the glorious lives God wills for us, God did it for us. Out of sheer generosity, he put us in right standing with himself, a pure gift. He got us out of this mess we're in and restored us to where he always wanted us to be. And he did it by the means of Jesus Christ. Now, for the record, I don't think that this passage lets us off the hook or gives us carte blanche to act in ways that counter what it means to live well with others and in relationship with God. But it does, I think, offer us something that purity culture can't, a sense of belonging just as we are. I cannot stand here and tell you that this topic still isn't entwined in a lot of shame for me. I think that's evidenced by how awkward I am right now. But I have a lot more internal work to do on this. But I will tell you, raising twin boys on the cusp of middle school is giving me a sense of urgency to do this work now. I'm digging through the layers of this as a former Catholic, as a Latina, and it's work that I describe as decolonizing my personal religious history. A similar concept might be deconstruction. And what I mean by these terms is that I must go back and look at the framework my spiritual, religious identity was built on and excavate and rebuild those blocks that are damaged. In order to do this work, I can't remain silent. Not if I want to teach my boys in a more holistic way. Not if I want to heal the shame I feel. And it means risking vulnerability. It means revisiting old narratives that are hurtful. Some of those narratives are anchored in falsehood. They become myths that we have to unlearn. Depending on your intersectionality, this can be very layered, very interwoven. As a Latina, I can't do the work of healing the vestiges of purity culture in my own ethos without also confronting issues of gender and race. So for you, it might be worth taking inventory. If you're in a space of divesting from old systems or doctrines that were harmful, what are the connected parts that can't be unearthed separately? Issues maybe of gender or class, sexuality, race and ethnicity. Our identity is intersectional. A glorious gift of aging, for me at least, has been being acquainted, or reacquainted maybe, with my body. One way that I've tried to shift the narrative is to see the many functions my body has played over the course of my life. In high school, I ran track and played soccer. The high school me would orient my body into being fit enough, sometimes maybe skinny enough. Then my physique was still being about being good enough. Now I rewrite that narrative. I give thanks to the movement of my body that sustains my health and wellness. As a mother, I give thanks for the life my womb held, the sustenance my body provided for my boys. I shift my mindset to gratitude, to thanking the softness of my body. In doing this, I am befriending my body, reclaiming it as my own. And you can start that reclamation anytime. Cristina Tesoro, sex educator and therapist, suggests that one way to heal from purity culture is to reflect on the ways in which you've internalized normative messages about sex, love, and what constitutes good or bad behavior. Make a list of rules, she says, you followed without questions, a list of shoulds. Ask yourself whose voice you hear those rules in, right? So if it says you should be demure, you should only give side hugs, you should whatever it is, right? Whose voice are you hearing that in? Is it a parent? Maybe a coach? Was it you at a certain age? Then think about the feelings associated with those rules. Anger? Shame? Safety? What does a response with compassion and grace look like today? Here's another approach that I've been doing. I'm asking myself, what are the aims of purity culture? What was purity culture about? Was it about finding an authentic love relationship? Was it about keeping in good standing with God to avoid hell? Was it about relationship with God? And I answer where I am today. And I see that purity culture isn't serving me in any of those fronts. How can you engage in love authentically without the self-harm of purity culture? How can you be in relationship with God without the self-harm of purity culture? How can you know and feel that you are loved and valued beyond the threat of hell without the self-harm of purity culture? I'm still unpacking this for myself. It's hard, it's emotional work. To do it well, I have to be gentle with myself. And I have to be honest. And in this particular season, this unpacking, for me at least, is hitched to my grief. And that's a lot. My mother died in September, so that journey is hard for me. I'm chipping away at it little bit by little bit. I don't know what that looks like for you, but I need you to know that you are worth it. You are worth taking the road back to yourself. I want to close our time, or my time with you this morning, with a poem by Derek Walcott. And my hope is that as I speak these words to you, you might find something redeeming in the lines. I often find that poetry is sometimes the best prayer, especially if I can't find the words myself. So this is Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photograph, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. Thank you.